Vivian, don't call it being forgotten. You've been excluded. You have no value in this house anymore. I didn't cry. I only felt a chill run down my spine, not from the snow outside the window, but from how a young woman could speak cruelty as smoothly as pouring wine for a guest. On the screen, Sloane beamed in the middle of the feast, while I sat before a single lonely plate, hearing the clink of glasses like a hammer sealing the lid of my own coffin. I looked to Caleb, my son, waiting for one glance, one mom, anything that proved I was still his mother. But he lowered his head, silent, in a way that made me understand some families don't erase you with words, they erase you with indifference. And at the exact moment I thought my name had been crossed out forever, the doorbell rang. A stranger called me by my maiden name, pressed a USB drive into my hand labeled Evidence, as if someone had just turned on a light in the darkest room of my life. If you were me, would you open the USB or swallow the humiliation? Hit subscribe and comment open or stay silent. My name is Vivian Rowe, 58 years old, a widow, the brown skin of an American woman who's grown used to harsh sun and long winters. This house once held Graham's footsteps, once held Caleb's laughter when he was little, but since my husband died, everything has turned disciplined to the point of cold, as if one crooked picture frame could make the whole room angry. On Christmas Eve, I didn't set much out. One plate, one glass, one candle. The small flame trembled, reflecting on the window pane filmed with mist, and the snow outside fell like white scraps of paper, torn up and scattered over a person's life. I sat up straight, hands neatly placed on the table, trying not to stare at the empty chair across from me for too long. Stay calm, Vivian. Don't turn yourself into someone begging. I'd said that line many times over the past year, not to make myself stronger, but to remember that if I fell, no one would lift me up. Caleb was busy with his new family. Sloane, Ashbury, my daughter-in-law, always knew how to turn every conversation into a test, and somehow I was always the one who failed. My phone vibrated on the tabletop, the screen lighting up like an eye opening in the dark. The name Sloane Ashbury glowed. I hesitated for one beat, then answered. Instantly, the light from the other side of the screen slammed into my face. Golden string lights, a wreath, Christmas music blaring, laughter bright and sharp like glass clinking. The camera swept fast, showing off a long dinner table, turkey shining with grease, red wine sparkling, and faces swaying with happiness. Sloane appeared in the middle of the frame, smiling wide, yet her eyes were so cold, I felt my back tighten as if someone had yanked an invisible cord. Vivian, don't call it being forgotten. You've been excluded. You have no value in this house anymore. I heard every word as clearly as the crunch of snow under tires, dry, grinding deep. In that moment, I didn't know if my heart was still beating or if it was only pretending so I wouldn't collapse right there in front of the screen. I scanned the feast on my phone like someone standing outside a warm room, looking in through glass. And then I saw Caleb. My son sat at the head of the table, slightly off camera, his shirt crisp, his eyes lowered, his hand around a glass he didn't drink from. I said his name before my pride could stop me. Caleb, look at me. Sloane leaned closer to the camera, as if she could kiss the screen, her voice sweet and razor sharp. He's busy. You know, adults have adult things to do. Caleb still didn't look up. His silence wasn't loud, but it was heavy, heavy like a wet blanket thrown straight onto my chest. I waited for a glance, a frown, any sign that he was pushing back. Nothing. Only other people's laughter at the table, and the cheerful music like it was mocking me. I went rigid, forcing my voice to stay normal, but my throat was dry, as if all the water had been drawn out of it. You're going to let her talk to your mother like that? Caleb's lips shifted as if he meant to speak, then stopped. His eyes still avoided mine. still stayed lowered like he was staring at a stain on the tablecloth. Sloane laughed, spun the camera around once more, as if she wanted the whole world to witness me sitting alone. The call ended quickly. The screen went black, and my kitchen immediately felt darker, colder, quieter, as if the power had been cut to everything. I sat there a long time, the candle still burning, but the flame wasn't enough to warm the feeling of being shoved to the edge. My phone vibrated again. A message from Sloane. "We've locked your accounts. For safety." I read it over and over, feeling as if the words were leaking out of the screen. Safety. A word that sounded decent, but I knew it was a noose. I grabbed my card, opened my banking app, logged in. Error. I tried again and again. My heart started pounding, this time from panic. I threw on my coat, stepped out into wind sharp enough to cut skin, drove to the convenience store near my house. The blue-white neon made my face look pale in the glass reflection. I picked up a few things, stood at the counter, swiped my card. The machine made one short sound, emotionless. Transaction declined. I froze. The cashier looked at me awkward. I tried again, as if changing the angle could change fate. Declined again. Heat rushed up my face, not from embarrassment, but from realizing someone had just cut off my lifeline, neatly, politely, and with a logic that was terrifying. I turned back to my car, both hands clamped on the steering wheel. The snow began to fall thicker, white flakes, tapping the windshield like 1,000 fingers knocking. My phone in my coat pocket vibrated once more. Unknown number. I opened it, and the blood in my body seemed to turn to ice as I read the short line on the screen. "Don't sleep. They're signing papers to erase you." I drove home through the snow, my mind still echoing with the machine's transaction declined, and that unknown number text, like a needle lodged at the base of my skull. My kitchen greeted me with the smell of candle wax and a silence too spotless, the table still set for one person, as if it were trying to prove I hadn't been pushed out, that I'd only imagined it. I set my phone on the tabletop, my hands still cold, and opened social media like a habit of hurting myself. Sloane's page appeared so fast, it felt like she'd been waiting, only waiting for me to see it and bleed. A photo of the feast, warm lights, overflowing smiles, and in the left corner was Caleb, exactly where he'd been earlier, the same quiet posture. Under the photo was a caption with my name tagged, like hanging me on a nail without ever touching me. "Perfect night with everyone that matters." I read each word slowly, and I understood immediately what she was doing, turning my Christmas pain into content, turning my absence into a verdict. If anyone asked where's the mother-in-law, she had the answer prepared, in a line as pretty as a card and as poisonous as a blade. Notifications began to burst, people dropping hearts, people commenting. Someone wrote, "Family goals." Someone asked, "Vivian didn't come," and some even tagged me again, shoving me into the middle of the circle. I stared at those words and felt my face heat, not from embarrassment, but from humiliation, laid out in public, bright as the party lights on the other side of the screen. I messaged Caleb before I could think through the consequences, my fingers tapping hard as if I could crack the glass. "Have you seen Sloane's post?" The message went through, and minutes later my son's reply appeared, brief as a door left half shut. "Mom, don't make this a big deal." I looked at that sentence, then back at the photo, the caption, my tagged name, and a dry laugh scraped out of my throat. I replied at once. No edits, no softening. "I'm being publicly humiliated, and you call that a big deal?" I waited. I waited the way you wait for wood to groan in an old house, for a sign that proves you haven't been left behind. Caleb didn't answer. Only a small word appeared under my message, seen cold as a stamp slammed onto paperwork. I sat still, feeling like I'd reached out to grab my child and grabbed empty air. I poured water into a glass so my hands would stop shaking, but the glass nearly slipped from my fingers with a sudden tremor. On the shelf, Graham's photo sat beside the clock, his smile still gentle, the way it was when he was alive. I looked at my husband's empty chair, and in my head a confession formed, painful, clear as a bell. I taught my son to say, "I love you," but I forgot to teach him to say, "Don't hurt me." Right then, the TV in the living room flicked on by itself, as if someone had pressed a button from far away. The sound flooded the house, and on the screen I saw Sloane, hair neatly set, eyes that knew how to perform, sitting inside the serious frame of a local program. She smiled the exact way people smile for an audience, and then she said, her voice soft in a terrifying way, "My mother-in-law is fragile." Sloane's voice filled my living room, smooth as velvet, yet cold as metal, slipping straight into my ears through the TV speakers. She sat under studio lights, the glow catching her cheekbones, her eyes locked on the camera, as if she were telling the whole town I was a problem to manage, not a person to respect. "She's easily agitated. She needs to be monitored." That sentence landed like a label slapped across my forehead. I heard the host murmur a sympathetic, "Oh," heard the audience exhale, and I understood she was boxing me into a container stamped unstable. Once that stamp stuck, everything I said afterward could be dismissed as a breakdown, and every protest could be turned into proof. I turned off the TV, but silence didn't save anything. My phone lit up immediately, new notifications, people sending the link, people checking in with the kind of curiosity that pretends to be concern. Each message was a light touch that still left a bruise. I opened my banking app again, and the screen still showed an error, like a steel door slammed shut, my money inside, me outside. I called the hotline, sat through hold music long enough to make me shake, and then an agent's voice came on, polite, like she was reading a script. She said the account was being protected at the request of the authorized party. I asked who that was. She dodged, then mentioned verification procedures. I set the phone down, my palms burning, the feeling of having my right to breathe taken away inside my own life. Sloane's message arrived right after, short and sharp like an order. "If you make a scene, we'll put you in a nursing home." I read it, and a laugh cracked out of me, but it sounded like someone's hand closing around my throat. Nursing home? Those words weren't care. They were a prison wrapped in gift paper, a place where they lock you up and call it for your own good. I texted Caleb, the words trembling on the screen. "Do you know what she just said?" A moment later, "only seen" appeared. I stared at that word until my eyes burned, and then I realized I was trying to pull someone out of the dark while that person stood still and let the dark swallow me. I walked through the house as if searching for something that could prove I still had ownership here. Graham's paperwork drawer, the keepsake box he guarded, the old watch he used to polish. Suddenly, they felt like the only life rafts left afloat. I opened the cabinet, and my heart dropped. An empty space that didn't belong stared back at me. A few items missing, as if someone had slipped in and stolen pieces of my memory. My phone vibrated, this time with a message and a photo from Sloane. In the picture, Graham's scarf lay tossed over a trash bin, the keepsake box pried open, things shoved around like garbage. My hand went numb, my eyes fixed, and then Sloane called, her voice gentle, like she was soothing a child. "You're not being abandoned. You just have no value." I stood frozen, as if that line had stamped my entire life, my marriage, my motherhood, all the years I'd sacrificed to keep this family whole. Before I could even set the phone down, the doorbell rang, firm and insistent, cutting straight through my breath. I walked to the door, my heart punching against my ribs like it wanted out. Through the peephole, I saw a stranger standing under the porch light, his shoulders dusted with a thin layer of snow, his posture calm in a way that didn't make sense. I cracked the door open, and before I could ask who he was, he looked straight at me and spoke the name no one had used in years. Vivian Hale. I kept the door cracked open, my hand still on the latch, as if letting go would mean the whole house could be torn away from me. The man under the porch light looked straight at my face, eyes alert, calm in a way that made me uneasy. Snow clung to his shoulders, yet his voice was warm and steady, like he'd practiced so I wouldn't panic. Vivian Hale? I swallowed hard. Only people from my younger years ever called me that, and now that name sounded like a door that had been locked for years suddenly pried open. I asked who he was, how he knew that name, and why he'd come to my house on the very night I was being broken piece by piece. He didn't glance around, didn't size up my belongings. He only lifted both hands to chest level, palms open, a way of proving he hadn't come to steal. "My name is Ashford Roone," he said slowly, clearly. "You're being set up to be stripped of your rights." That sentence sent cold down my spine because it snapped every scattered fragment in my head into a terrifying shape. The feast video, the taption, the TV segment, the locked account, the nursing home threat. It was no longer a daughter-in-law's cruel mouth. It was a script. I stared at Ashford, searching for any sign of a scam, but he didn't rush, as if he knew I would resist trusting anyone. "You can close the door," he continued. "But before you do, I need to give you this." He reached into his coat pocket, the motion neat, without any sudden jerks. A faint metallic clink sounded. Then he placed a brass key into my palm, cold, heavy, with a small symbol etched into the shaft, like a seal. Right after that came a USB drive, wrapped with white tape, the letters written boldly, "Evidence." I stared at those two objects like they'd fallen from another life. My hand trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the feeling that someone had just thrown me a rope at the exact moment the water had risen to my chin. I asked what it was, who sent it, and why it was me. Ashford held my gaze a beat longer, then spoke in a low voice, as if the walls could hear. "Someone prepared for this day," he said. "That person wanted you to survive." Graham's name flashed through my mind like lightning. I tightened my grip on the key, the metal biting into my skin like a reminder this wasn't a dream. I wanted to ask more, to force Ashford to tell me everything, but he lifted a hand to stop me, like someone who knew I was about to burn myself alive with questions. "Listen to me," he said, each word dropping solid and sure. "Don't argue. Don't cry. You only need to let them expose themselves." I looked at him then, into the house where everything I owned was being decided by someone else. A part of me wanted to throw the USB away, slam the door, pretend that if I didn't look, it would disappear. Another part understood if I didn't open it, I would be pushed into a nursing home with the label "fragile" stamped on my forehead, and I would lose my chance to steer my own life. Ashford stepped back half a pace, as if giving me room to breathe. "I can't come in," he said, "but I can wait out here." I locked the door behind me and went straight into the living room, still gripping the key and the USB. I plugged the USB into my laptop, the dark screen reflecting my face, my eyes red from staying awake, from anger, from fear. A video file opened. One moment of silence, tight as a violin string. Then Graham appeared on the screen, his voice deep and familiar, and my heart clenched. "Sloan is stealing the inheritance," and Caleb signed. Graham's video kept playing, as if he'd been sitting there all along, waiting for the exact moment I was pushed to the edge. The image was slightly grainy, the warm yellow light of a familiar study, the bookshelf behind him, the same one I used to dust every week. Graham looked straight into the lens, calm in a way that hurt, his voice low as if placing each stone into a foundation. "Vivian, if you're watching this, it means they've started." I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. Graham didn't circle around it. He said Sloane's name clearly, mentioned the way she manipulated Caleb, mentioned how she would use the word safety to legalize stripping me of my rights. Then he said a phrase that made me grip the edge of the table, as if I might slip and fall right there. I established the North Glass Trust and North Glass Haven. I closed my eyes for a second, forcing down the dizziness. A trust is something people build with law, with signatures, with cold calculations. I'd assumed Graham's inheritance was this house, a few savings accounts, the keepsakes tucked in a drawer. Instead, he'd built a fortress I'd never seen, and that fortress was waiting to be opened at the right moment. Graham paused as if choosing his words carefully, then set the line that tightened my throat. You were pushed away from the table so you could see who pulled the chair. I remembered the video call, the party lights, the words, "You have no value," and I could see it. Graham had predicted this game. He didn't save me with comfort. He saved me with structure, with safeguards, with things Sloan couldn't break, with a smile. A message window appeared inside the file, a list of documents, scans, and sterile titles. One item read, Power of Attorney, and beneath it were my name and another, Caleb Rowe. I scrolled, my hand shaking so hard the cursor felt like it was sliding on ice. At the bottom of the page, Caleb's signature sat there, neat, familiar, like a blade cutting straight into my chest. The next morning, I stood in front of Marceline Ward's office, Graham's attorney. Her workspace smelled of fresh paper and strong coffee, everything arranged like a chessboard with the pieces already set. Marceline looked at me the way she looked at a case, not a woman coming apart. She took the USB, skimmed the files, then opened a thick folder and placed it on the desk in front of me. She slid a printed power of attorney across the table, the same page I'd seen Caleb's signature, right there, sharp enough to be cruel. Marceline asked, her voice dry, but not without pity. When did he sign this? I couldn't answer right away. In my head, I saw Caleb looking down at the feast. I saw that icy scene. I wanted to believe there was an explanation, but the signature sat there like a truth that didn't need arguments. Marceline clicked open another folder. A chain of emails filled the screen. Sender, Sloan Ashbury. Recipient, an unfamiliar address, but the content was terrifyingly familiar. The subject line was short, like a work note. Inside, only one sentence, clean and decisive. Push her out first, lock the money afterward. I read it and felt an icy chill up my spine. It matched everything that had happened perfectly, as if I were only a piece being moved on schedule. Marceline closed the laptop, looked at me, her gaze sharp as a blade freshly honed. This isn't all, she said. There's an accomplice, Attorney Dorian Glass. Marceline Ward didn't let me drown in emotion for long. She placed a blank sheet of paper in front of me, like laying the base for a verdict. You need to choose how you move forward, she said, her voice steady, her eyes not wavering. Either you react the way they want, or you act like the one in control. I stared at the empty page, then at Caleb's signature on the document beside it, and I understood. Every tear right now could be turned into evidence against me. I drew in a breath, set both hands on the desk, as if pinning myself down so I wouldn't shake. I don't take revenge. I convict. The words came out dry, but they held my spine straighter. Marceline opened an audio file from the USB. A timeline bar appeared on the screen, a file name plain enough to avoid attention. She hit play. A faint crackle. Then Sloane's voice filled the room. Intimate, like she was talking about skincare. But the content was cold enough to cut. Call her fragile. Emphasize instability. I stopped breathing. In the recording, Sloane didn't speak like someone erupting. She spoke like a director coaching an actor. She mentioned the timing of the post, the exact phrasing to use, how to create the impression of worrying about the mother-in-law, then sealed it with a small laugh as if everything were just a clever setup. Marceline paused the audio and looked at me. Do you understand now? She said. This isn't family conflict. This is a plan to strip your rights. I nodded, my throat tightening, because hearing Sloane in her true role made me realize I had been turned into a side character in my own life. My phone vibrated, a message from the unknown number from last night. You opened the USB. I flinched and looked at Marceline. She didn't seem surprised, only asked whether I wanted to meet that person. I answered with a nod, because I needed to know who was behind the curtain, who had placed that brass key in my hand like a signal.
The meeting happened right outside the office in a quiet hallway. Ashford Roone stood with his back to the wall, his coat still marked with snow, his gaze direct, like he'd prepared for every question. I walked up, the key in my coat pocket heavy, reminding me last night was real. "Why are you helping me?" I asked, voice low, because I was afraid of the answer. Ashford replied at once, no dodging. "Because Graham hired me." Then he continued, each word falling clearly.
Graham hired me to watch Sloane from day one. I went still. From day one meant from the moment Sloane walked into my home with that sweet smile, from the moment Caleb introduced her like a miracle. What had Graham seen that I hadn't? He'd prepared in silence, not because he doubted me, but because he understood. When someone wants to steal what's yours, they start by stealing your dignity, then your control. Ashford watched me, his voice dropping. "Don't step out too soon," he said. "They're confident. Let them stay confident a little longer." I went back into the office. Marceline already had a list of moves open like an escape map. But before I signed anything, before I filed anything or called the police, I opened my phone and went to my profile. My hand still slightly unsteady, but my mind now cold. I took a photo of the brass key resting in my palm, the metal catching the light like a warning. I typed one sentence short enough to make people stop scrolling, enough to make the most dangerous person flinch. Some doors aren't locked. They're only waiting for the right person to open them. Part 7. Sloane plays the victim. My post with the key spread faster than I expected. Comments poured in, half curiosity, half caution, like the whole town was pointing flashlights at a door they'd ignored before. I didn't reply to anyone. I let silence do its work, because I knew what Sloane hated most was anything she couldn't control. Within hours, Sloane appeared online again, this time in a close-up video. Her eyes were red, her voice trembling, one hand pressed to her chest like she was holding back a wave of pain. Behind her was a familiar corner of her house, soft lighting, everything arranged like the perfect victim frame. "I only want my mother-in-law to be safe." She said it like an oath, then narrated me in a pitying tone that I was easily agitated, that I was lonely, that I'd been unstable since Graham died. She didn't need to call me dangerous. She only needed people to believe I needed to be managed. I watched until the moment she wiped her tears, and I understood. Tears can be a weapon if the person holding them is cold enough. My phone kept vibrating. Friends messaged, "Are you okay?" Strangers offered advice like, "Don't be stubborn." Each message was a small stone thrown at my window, not shattering it, but cracking it a little more. I was about to shut my phone off when Caleb called. My son's voice was rough, like he hadn't slept all night. "Mom, stop," he said quickly, like he was afraid I'd cut in. "People are watching, they're talking. You doing this is only making it worse." I held the phone, looked at Graham's photo on the shelf, then asked Caleb, slow and clear, "Worse for who, Caleb? For me or for you?" On the other end, he went quiet for a beat, then exhaled hard, his voice dropping. "You know, Mom, if you do this, Sloane will get dragged, and I'll get dragged too." The truth in that sentence hurt more than Sloane's insults. I said it, each word like a knock on a table. "You're more afraid of looking bad than you are of your mother being erased from your life." Caleb fell silent. I heard him swallow, heard a small mom that sounded stuck, then he ended the call, leaving me with a thick, heavy emptiness. I went back to the files on the USB, this time refusing to let emotion steer. Marceline had told me to look for markers, names, connections. I opened the photo folder, scrolled past screenshots, then stopped on an image taken from a distance, like surveillance. Sloane stood beside a man in a dark suit, the two of them talking close, the kind of familiarity that went beyond a casual meeting. I zoomed in, my heart speeding, when I saw a name tag at the bottom corner of the photo, the print crisp and clear. Dorian Glass. I read the name again. It matched what Marceline had just said, like a fingerprint left on the scene. I scrolled down to the note attached to the photo. Just one line short cold, like a reminder from someone who already knew they were about to win. Sign before the holiday. Marceline Ward didn't let me rush on emotion. She pulled the photo with the name Dorian Glass to the center of the desk, set it beside Sloane's email chain and the rehearsal audio. You want a confrontation, she asked, or do you want to win? I stared at that name, then answered at once because I was too tired to be led around anymore. I want to win. The meeting took place in a bright office building, the kind designed to make you feel small. Dorian Glass stepped out of the elevator, hair neatly styled, a polite smile, eyes that swept over me like he was pricing me. He shook Marceline's hand first, then looked at me as if I were an attachment to the file. Vivian Rowe, he said smoothly, I hear you're having a difficult time. I didn't return that greeting. I placed my phone on the table, opened the photo of Sloane standing beside him, and zoomed in on the name tag, Dorian Glass. I caught a flicker at the corner of his eye, very fast, but enough to know the needle had hit skin. He leaned back in his chair and gave a soft laugh, like a man used to handling crises with confidence. Do you think you can beat the law? He asked, the words almost playful, but his gaze was... I met his eyes. I use the law to bury you. The air in the room seemed to thicken. Marceline didn't cut in, she let me speak, but her hand had already placed a stack of papers on the table, like setting a blade exactly where it needed to be. Dorian glanced at the pages, then looked up, his voice still composed. You're suspecting me? He said, because of a photo at an event and a few words taken out of context. Marceline slid a bank statement toward him without raising her voice. Not a few words, she said. Money. On the page, transfer lines were clear, several small payments repeating the exact pattern people use to avoid attention. Sender, Sloane Hashberry. Recipient, an account connected to Dorian Glass. I watched his hands. His fingers stayed on the table, but the tips tightened slightly, a reflex when cornered. He studied the statement a beat too long, then gave a thin smile, his tone sharpening. What are you going to do? He asked. Put it online, rile up the crowd, then turn yourself into the unstable woman they're already calling you. I understood he was trying to pull me into Sloane's trap, make me angry, make me lose control. I kept my voice even because I needed him afraid, not me. I'll submit it to the right place, I said, and I'll make you explain every dollar. Dorian looked at Marceline, and this time his eyes were no longer polite. Miss Ward, he said, you're playing a big game. Marceline didn't blink. So are you, she replied, but you picked the wrong person. We left with one thing clear. Dorian wasn't down yet, but his mask had cracked. The moment we returned to Marceline's office, she shut the door, pulled another file folder out, and said the line that sent cold straight through my bones. Caleb's signature shows signs of forgery. I froze. If the signature was forged, it meant Caleb could be a victim, or a piece being forced, or a name replaced by a colder hand. Before I could ask anything else, the wind outside began to howl, and snow started lashing the glass so hard it felt like someone was trying to erase every trace. My phone rang. Caleb's name flashed on the screen. I answered and heard my son's voice, tangled in the storm. Mom, I'm coming. I left Marceline Ward's office when the sky had already turned pitch dark.
the wind twisting thick sheets of snow like smoke. The parking lot was nearly empty, streetlights trembling in the whiteout, and her words kept hammering in my head. The signature shows signs of forgery, like a steady blow. If Caleb didn't sign, then who signed in his place? Who dared to put my son's name on paper to lock my life shut? My phone was still warm from the call. "Mom, I'm coming."
Caleb said it through the wind, and that sentence made me want to believe and want to fear at the same time. I drove home gripping the steering wheel, eyes fixed on the road, like it was a crack in the ice. Each time the tire slipped, I heard Sloane's laugh in my memory, as if she were standing inside the storm, watching me wobble. I had barely stepped inside when the doorbell rang again, this time more insistent. I stood still for a few seconds, my heart heavy, then opened the door. Caleb stood on the porch, hair and coat dusted with snow, his face pale from cold and from something colder. He looked at me, eyes red like he'd fought the entire night, then stepped in without waiting to be invited. The door shut, the wind cut off, the house went quiet again. Caleb stood in the middle of the living room, looking around like someone lost in a place that used to be his and now felt unfamiliar. He looked at Graham's chair, at the candle that had burned down, then at me, like he was searching for a beginning that felt safe. "Mom," he said, voice breaking, "I was wrong." He stepped forward and dropped to his knees, the sound of it dry and heavy against the floor. I watched, and part of me wanted to rush in, lift my son up, hold him the way I did when he was little, as if an embrace could drag time backward. But another part of me, the part whose accounts had been locked, the part branded fragile, threatened with a nursing home, stood still as stone. "Kneeling doesn't fix a signature," I said. My voice stayed calm, and that calm made Caleb lift his head, his eyes more frightened because he knew I was changing the rules. Caleb swallowed, both hands resting on his thighs, trembling slightly. "I didn't sign," he blurted, fast, like he was afraid I'd cut him off. "I swear." "I never signed that paper. I let Sloane keep my phone. I let her handle the paperwork. I thought it was keeping you safe. I was stupid. I listened." And scenes flashed through my mind. Caleb looking down at the feast, that icy scene, his voice telling me, "Don't make a big deal." Everything suddenly took a different shape. Still painful, but clearer. It wasn't a knife plunged straight in. It was a hand letting go at the exact moment I needed it to hold on. "You were afraid of losing your wife, so you chose to lose your mother," I asked slowly, letting each word land. Caleb shut his eyes, his shoulders folding as if he'd been struck. "I was scared everything would collapse," he said, voice small. "Sloane said if I stood with you, she'd leave. She'd say I abandoned my wife, abandoned my family. She'd drag me down. I thought you could take it, Mom. You always take it." That line stabbed my chest because it was true, in the cruelest way. I'd taken it for so long, people assumed I was allowed to take it forever. I studied my son, the trace of Graham in his features, and bitterness rose like the taste of metal. "Look at me," I said. "Am I taking it, or am I being erased?" Caleb started crying, but he didn't wail. The tears dropped onto his hands, soaking into the fabric like melting snow. He knelt there, and for the first time in days, I saw him looking straight at consequences, not at pride. "What will you do to fix it?" I asked. "Don't beg. Give me an action." Caleb lifted his head. "Tell me what you want me to do, and I'll do it." I walked to the table, took out a sheet of paper and a pen, and set them in front of him, like drawing a line. "You sign a sworn statement," I said. "You state clearly that Sloane controlled the accounts, held the paperwork, manipulated you, threatened me. You sign as an insider, and you take responsibility under the law." Caleb nodded at once, but I wasn't finished. I pulled out my phone, opened the messages, and showed him. "You cut off her control," I said.
You change passwords, revoke every access, cancel every authorization Sloan is holding, and you send Marceline Ward everything tonight. You don't ask her permission, you inform her. If you hesitate again, I'll consider that your choice. Caleb trembled, then nodded harder, like a man waking from a spell. He stood, wiped his face, pulled out his phone, and started right in front of me. I watched him call the bank and demand third-party access be removed. I watched him go into email, change passwords, enable verification, check logged-in devices. Each tap felt like a cord being cut from Sloan's hands. While Caleb worked, I called Marceline. She picked up immediately, her voice still sharp as shears. I told her Caleb was here, ready to sign. She told me to keep everything in order, to keep emotion out of it, because they were waiting for me to slip. Caleb took the pen and signed the statement under the living room light. His handwriting wavered because his hand still shook, but this time that signature was truly his, and looking at it made me feel lighter and heavier at once. I thought of Graham, of how he built North Glass Trust like a fortress, and now I was standing inside that fortress, holding evidence, my son kneeling, then standing back up by his own choice. Marceline's number flashed again, this time short and urgent. I answered, and her voice cut through everything. "Sloan is at the gate." Marceline's words, "Sloan is at the gate," made my house feel like it had been cinched tight. Caleb sprang to his feet, face pulled taut, his phone still in hand, with password changes half finished. I looked at my son, then toward the door, and I understood this moment would decide who I was in this family, a mother to be managed or a woman who kept her right to choose. Sloan stood outside, her voice drifting through the doorbell speaker, sweet in a way that sounded rehearsed. "Vivian, open up. I just want to talk." I didn't open it. I called Marceline and put her on speaker. She answered immediately, crisp, like she was placing a blade in my palm at the exact right second. "Don't let her in. Keep it where everything can be recorded," she warned. Caleb steps onto the porch, opened the gate, and stood in the way, and for the first time I saw my son, not flinching. Sloan saw him, her eyes flickering. Then she shifted instantly into hurt. She pressed a hand to her chest as if holding a broken heart, but I looked closely and saw calculation, an actress choosing the right angle for the camera. And he said, "This has gone too far." Sloan turned and looked at me through the glass, her eyes shining, her mouth trembling, and I knew she was trying to drag me back into the role of the difficult mother-in-law. She wanted me to explode so the whole town would have a reason to call me unstable again. I didn't give her that. I opened the door only as much as I needed, stood behind the threshold, letting the distance stay as a wall. "I just want peace," Sloan said, like a plea. I stared straight at her, voice even. "You want me to disappear?" The words fell softly, but they made Sloan's face stiffen for a split second, just enough for me to see the mask slip on her skin. Marceline arrived within an hour, carrying files, printouts, and a calm that made other people stand straighter without realizing it. She didn't argue with Sloan. She simply told her that certain things had been filed, certain things saved, certain things delivered to the right places. Caleb handed over his sworn statement along with call logs, login history, and message chains. From that moment on, this wasn't mother-in-law and daughter-in-law anymore. It became a matter with a paper trail. The emergency hearing moved faster than I expected, as if the legal system understood that some people are stripped of their rights by speed. I sat in the room facing the judge, Marceline at my side, my hands on the table, my palms warming as I listened to each piece of evidence being read. Video, emails, audio, bank transfers, the photo with the name Dorian Glass, and Caleb's testimony, all of it fitting together without gaps. Sloan sat across from me, her face pale, her eyes still searching for someone to rescue her image. She tried again, voice trembling, words soft as cotton. "I only wanted my mother-in-law to be safe." Marceline didn't need to raise her voice. She asked about the transfers, about the email. Push her out first, lock the money afterward. Sloane went quiet. This time, silence didn't save her. It exposed her. The judge signed the emergency order. I heard every word clearly, and each one felt like a lock turning open inside my chest. The order restored access to my accounts, froze the connected assets to prevent movement, and issued a restraining order. No contact, no approach. Enough for me to breathe without looking over my shoulder. Sloane's sentence was entered under an agreement, but it wasn't light. 3 years probation, 400 hours of community service, full restitution of damages and related fees, a ban on holding financial authority or power of attorney over elderly people, mandatory behavioral intervention. I looked at her and realized what hurt Sloane most wasn't the numbers. It was having control pulled out of her hands in front of everyone. Dorian Glass was named in the filings, suspended immediately, and the process to revoke his license was triggered. When Marceline said that, I saw Sloane's shoulders jerk like she'd lost her last bridge. A man used to using the law as a shield was now being bitten by the law itself. Caleb sat beside me afterward, eyes swollen, hands clenched, like he was holding himself together through regret. He spoke slowly, as if each word cut into his old life. I'm going to divorce her. I didn't answer right away. I only looked at my son, at his late awakening, and felt pain and relief braided together. When the papers were prepared, Caleb stood across from Sloane in the signing room, his voice hoarse but steady. You lost your control over me, and you lost me. Sloane looked at him, eyes red, but this time her tears didn't work. I understood then, once a person has been seen through, every performance becomes noise. That night I came home, turned on the kitchen light, set a single glass on the table, and for the first time in days, I felt the house belonged to me again. I looked at Graham's empty chair, and I didn't feel weak. I felt prepared. I whispered the closing line, like stamping it onto my new life. I won not because I screamed. I won because I stopped begging to be loved. My phone vibrated. A message from Ashford Rune, short and cold, like another door opening in the dark. One more person signed. I stood in the kitchen for a long time, watching the warm light spill across the tabletop, where the glass caught it like an open eye. Ashford Rune's message sat there, short, ruthless, and strong enough to make every victory from earlier feel like a thin coat of paint. One more person signed. I repeated it in my head, and then I understood. A life doesn't break from one punch. It breaks from the quiet handshakes behind your back. I didn't call him back right away. I walked into the living room and ran my fingers along the arm of Graham's chair, the wood worn down by years. I pictured him sitting there, watching me with the same eyes that once taught me how to stay calm. And I realized what he left behind wasn't only North Glass Trust or a legal plan, it was a lesson about dignity. The one thing no one has the right to lock away, even if they're holding the keys to your accounts. Caleb came up behind me and spoke softly, like he was afraid to break something. Mom, are you okay? I turned to look at my son, and for the first time, I wasn't searching for an apology. I was searching for a promise. I'll be okay, I told him, if you remember what today felt like, what it felt like when you realized silence is an action too. Caleb lowered his head, eyes red, then nodded, a nod heavy as stone, but real. I opened my phone and wrote one short line. No pleading, no grand speech. I posted it on my page like a marker for the people who had been too quick to believe Sloane's tears, and for every woman who has been called fragile simply because she demanded the right to live her own life. Don't mistake kindness for weakness, and don't mistake silence for peace. I watched the words appear, then turned off the screen, because this time I didn't need anyone's approval. Outside, the snow kept falling, but I didn't see it as something cutting and cruel anymore. I saw it like a clean white curtain settling over old footprints, so I could start again on my own feet. People like Sloane always believe they win when they make you beg, when they humiliate you,
when they frighten you into shrinking. They don't fear your anger. They fear your awakening, the moment you stop pleading and start setting terms. If you're listening to this story and you recognize yourself in it, in a dinner table where your chair was left empty, in a group chat where you got seen instead of protected, in a family where they call you too sensitive so they can control you, remember this: you don't have to shout to deserve respect. You only have to stand where you belong. Keep the evidence, keep your boundaries, and keep your self-respect the way you keep your breath. I used to believe family was the place you always returned to. That Christmas night taught me another truth. Sometimes family is where you have to save yourself first. And when you do, you don't just save one holiday, you save the rest of your life. I looked at Ashford's message again. One more person signed. I set the phone down, lifted the glass, took a small sip, and felt the cool water slide down my throat like a vow. Tomorrow, I will find that name.
Not for revenge, but to end once and for all this habit of the world turning the elderly into assets, turning women into targets, turning kinship into a trap labeled safety. And if you ask me what made me win, I'll tell you the truth. I won because I remembered who I was before they could stick a label on me.